All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're embarking on a pretty incredible journey that takes us from a persistent, highly popularized archaeological myth in ancient Iraq all the way to the awe-inspiring, verified reality of 12th century robotics. We're going to see how sometimes the actual truth of human innovation is far more fascinating than the science fiction stories we tend to invent about the past.
Did ancient empires actually have electricity? That question has captivated imaginations for decades. You've probably seen it debated on television or read wild theories about it online. The idea that ancient civilizations were somehow plugging things in is definitely a tantalizing one, and it's largely driven by a curious little artifact discovered near Baghdad. But as we explore the actual evidence today, we really need to ask ourselves, are we looking at ancient high-tech, or are we just totally misunderstanding the past?
Section 1. The Ancient Battery Myth.
To understand why so many folks believed ancient civilizations were secretly harnessing electric power, we have to look at the timeline. During the era of the Parthian and Sasanian empires in Mesopotamia, so roughly 150 BC to 650 AD, these little clay vessels were created. Fast forward to 1936, and a 14-centimeter ceramic pot was unearthed in Kujit Rabu, Iraq. Inside this little pot was a copper tube, and inside that tube was a heavily oxidized iron rod, all held tightly in place by a stopper made of asphalt or bitumen. When an assistant at the Iraq Museum named Wilhelm Koenig examined this artifact a couple of years later in 1938, he proposed a sensational idea. He claimed it was a primitive galvanic cell, basically a battery.
Now here is where Koenig's theory completely crashes into archaeological reality. Koenig didn't just think it was a battery. He thought he knew exactly what it was used for. He believed this device was used for electroplating silver objects with a thin layer of gold. He figured this explained some of the gilded artifacts found in the region. But there's a massive problem with that. Modern archaeologists confirm that ancient Mesopotamian artifacts were absolutely never electroplated. Actually, scratch that. They were fire-gilded, using a totally different method that involved mercury. So Koenig's foundational premise for what the battery even did was completely debunked.
But wait, I know exactly what some of you are thinking. Didn't some television shows prove that this thing could actually generate electricity? Well, yes, shows like Mythbusters did manage to generate 4.33 volts of electricity using lemon juice as an acid. But context is absolutely crucial here. To get that 4.33 volts, they had to string 10 heavily modified replica jars together in a series circuit. That is literally not how these isolated artifacts were found in the dirt. They were never found wired together like that.
Section 2. Debunking the Baghdad Battery.
So if this thing wasn't powering ancient light bulbs, and it wasn't electroplating jewelry, why does the battery theory totally fall apart under scientific scrutiny? Simply put, the physical design of the jar makes it a terrible battery. First off, that bitumen seal is a massive insulator. If you were actually using it as a battery, topping off the acidic electrolyte fluid would be a total nightmare. Second, and maybe most importantly, the copper tube didn't stick out of the plug. It was fully encased inside. You physically couldn't connect a wire to complete an electrical circuit. No way. Third, scientific tests proved that by completely sealing the cylinder, you deprive the cell of oxygen, which instantly stops the production of electricity. And finally, if it were an active battery, we'd expect to see copious copper salts or traces of gold and silver, but there were absolutely none. So without external wires, with a perfectly sealed insulating plug, and missing all the necessary chemical residues, these jars just could not have functioned as batteries. So what was the true purpose of this mysterious artifact? Honestly, it's actually quite practical. It was a protective container for sacred papyrus scrolls. But what about that acidic residue Koenig found inside? Well, it wasn't battery acid. It was just the decayed remains of papyrus or parchment. We know this for sure because almost identical jars were found in nearby Seleucia back in 1930, and those jars still had the decomposed remains of papyrus scrolls wrapped around their inner rods to keep them safe. It was an ancient filing cabinet, not an ancient Duracell.
Section 3. The True Father of Robotics.
We love the idea of ancient high-tech so much that we sometimes force the evidence to fit our imaginations. But the beautiful truth is, we don't need to rely on debunked myths about ancient batteries to find staggering technological genius in the Middle East. Let's pivot over to the Islamic Golden Age. As robotics expert Mark E. Rosim points out, while earlier Greek cultures built mechanical illusions, Arab engineers were focused on manipulating the environment for practical human comfort. It's time to meet an engineer whose verifiable, documentable reality blows the Baghdad battery myth completely out of the water.
Meet Ismail al-Jazari.
Living in Mesopotamia between 1136 and 1206, Al-Jazari was a brilliant Arab polymath and the chief engineer at the Artuklu Palace. Today, he is widely celebrated by historians as the father of robotics and a true pioneer of modern-day engineering. He wasn't relying on parlor tricks. He was a highly practical craftsman whose incredible mechanical designs literally paved the way for modern automation.
Back in 1206, he authored the Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices. And guys, this wasn't just a book of theoretical guesses. It was a meticulously documented, brilliantly illustrated do-it-yourself manual. He detailed over 50 automated machines, complete with step-by-step instructions on exactly how to construct them out of brass, copper, and wood. He only wrote down what he had actually built himself.
Section 4. Ingenious Mechanical Devices.
Al-Jazari took the fundamental laws of basic physics and transformed them into complex, highly functional machinery that genuinely looks like something from the future. Take his water-raising machines, which are the direct ancestors of the steam engine. For his double-action suction pump, a water wheel turns a system of gears, which then drives an oscillating slot rod. Then, and this is a real game-changer, a crank connecting rod converts that circular rotary motion into a back-and-forth linear motion. This pushes two pistons in horizontally opposed cylinders. The result? By using the first known true suction pipes, he was able to lift water an astonishing 13.6 meters up into delivery pipes. This is absolute mechanical brilliance.
But he didn't stop at vital water pumps supplying 13th century Damascus. He built programmable automata. We're talking literal robots here. He designed a humanoid waitress that served drinks from a hidden reservoir on a perfectly timed 7-minute delay. He created a hand-washing automaton featuring a flush mechanism exactly like the ones we use in modern toilets. He built a peacock fountain where, based entirely on water displacement, automated servants would physically pop out to offer you soap and towels. And perhaps the most mind-blowing of the whole shebang, a programmable musical robot band that floated on a boat. It featured a drum machine with little pegs. If you moved the pegs around, the robots would physically play different drum patterns and rhythms.
And we literally can't talk about Al-Jazari without mentioning his masterpiece clocks. These towering structures weren't just for keeping time, they were incredibly complex programmable computers demonstrating an absolute mastery over hydraulic switching and mechanical sequencing. The elephant clock was the first water clock to accurately record uneven temporal hours across the seasons, triggering robotic birds and humanoid figures to move at set intervals. And the castle clock? That was an 11-foot-tall hydro-powered astronomical clock. It is widely considered the very first programmable analog computer, completely mapping the zodiac while robotic musicians played in the background.
Section 5. Engineering the future.
Al-Jazari wasn't relying on magic, and he certainly wasn't relying on misunderstood clay pots. He was doing the real math and laying the physical groundwork for the Industrial Revolution centuries before it even happened. Just consider these foundational mechanisms: the camshaft, the crankshaft and connecting rod, the escapement mechanism, conical valves. These aren't just historical footnotes, folks. That crank connecting rod mechanism he used to transform continuous rotary motion into linear motion way back in 1206, it is literally the central, beating heart of the modern internal combustion engine. These specific components invented by Al-Jazari are quite literally what drive your car today.
As Mark Ralsheim summarizes so perfectly, the greatest contribution here was the concept of practical application. What really sets Al-Jazari apart is that he didn't just build novel toys to amuse royalty. He applied brilliant mechanical logic to actually improve the daily lives, the water supply, and the critical infrastructure of his society.
So what should you take away from all this? Well, while sensational stories of ancient batteries making electricity in 200 BC definitely make for fun sci-fi, they often distract us from the truth. The true, verified history of human engineering, like a 12th century polymath building programmable robot bands and designing the modern crankshaft, is infinitely more fascinating than the myths. It really makes you wonder, if true history gave us 12th century robots, what other real marvels are hiding right now behind modern myths? Thank you so much for exploring this explainer with me today, and keep questioning what you think you know about the past.